Hey, grease monkey. Wrong building. Oil change place is 2 blocks down. The 3 black belts laughed. Julian Cross said nothing, only set his daughter's pink backpack against the wall and bent to untie his shoes. He had come to Black Ridge Combat Academy to be nobody, just another beginner, just a father signing his 9-year-old up for lessons. The instructors had other plans. When the last student left, the doors were bolted. The backpack was emptied across the mat. A phone came up recording. An arm closed around Julian's throat from behind. 52 seconds later, all 3 black belts were on the floor and could not get up. The bay door of Halstead Auto stayed open until 7 most nights, and Julian Cross was usually the last one under it. He worked the way some men prayed, without hurry and without noise, and by the end of a shift, the only sound from his stall was the click of a socket wrench finding the next bolt. Eden did her homework on an overturned milk crate near the compressor pink backpack at her feet, pencil moving in the careful block letters of a girl who had recently decided that cursive was for showing off. She was 9. She had her mother's chin and none of her mother's talk, which was the thing people noticed about her once they got past the missing tooth. Julian had come to this town 6 years earlier with a duffel bag, a car seat, and a folder he had never opened again. He told the shop owner he was good with engines. He did not say where he had learned to be good with anything. When men at the counter talked about deployments, he let the conversation move past him the way water moves past a stone. At the top of the hall closet in their apartment, there was a gray metal box with a combination lock. Eden had asked about it once when she was 7, and Julian had told her it was old paperwork. That was true in the way that a locked door is a wall. The thing at school happened on a Wednesday. He got the call at 2:40 in the afternoon, and by the time he arrived, Eden was in the front office with an ice pack on her wrist and a boy named Trevor Ames sitting 3 chairs away with his arms folded and his mother already talking. Nothing had been broken. Nothing had even been very serious, the vice principal said in the tone adults use when they have decided a thing is finished. Trevor had grabbed Eden by the wrist and twisted it because she would not give up the swing. Eden had not hit him back. Eden had not done anything at all. That was the part Julian could not put down. In the truck, she looked straight ahead through the windshield and said, "I didn't know what to do with my arm. He just had it, and I couldn't figure out how to get it back." Julian drove another 2 blocks before he answered. "That's a fixable thing." "Is it?" "It's one of the most fixable things there is." He did not tell her that he had once spent years learning a dozen different ways to take a wrist back, and that he had left that whole language behind on purpose. But there was a difference between refusing to speak a language and refusing to let your child learn to say stop. Black Ridge Combat Academy sat in a strip of gray commercial buildings out past the highway junction between a vacant carpet outlet and a tax office. The sign was black with red lettering, and the windows were papered with photographs of men mid-throw jaws, tight veins up. There were 2 other schools in town. One had closed in the spring. The other was 35 minutes each way, and Julian worked until 7. He read the schedule taped inside the glass. Youth class, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 5:30 to 6:25. Adult beginners, 7 o'clock, same days. Eden pressed her forehead to the window and looked at the mats. "They're all really big. You won't be with them. You'd be in the first class." "Are you going to sit and watch the whole time?" "No," Julian said. "I'm going to sign up too." He said it evenly, and he meant it the way he said it. He would take the beginner class. He would be a man in his 30s who learned to fall down for the first time and never once let anyone in that building suspect otherwise. Because if he stood in the back and did nothing, someone would ask why he wasn't training. And if he trained honestly, someone would know inside a week. The only way to disappear in a room like that was to walk into the middle of it and be ordinary on purpose. They came back the following Tuesday. Julian had worked through lunch to leave the shop early and had not had time to change, and there was a black smear of gear oil across the front of his shirt that had gone in too deep to wash out at the shop sink. The front desk was unmanned. A man was leaning on it anyway, arms spread wide over the counter, a black belt worn soft and pale at the folds. He was somewhere near 40, built thick through the neck, and he looked up at Julian the way a customs officer looks up at a passport. "Hey, grease monkey," he said. "Wrong building. Oil change place is 2 blocks down." 2 other instructors were stretching on the mat, and both of them laughed. The one nearest the wall was younger, lean phone already in his hand, Landon Pierce, according to the photograph behind him, where the 3 of them stood shoulder to shoulder under the word family. The heavy one with the shaved head was Gavin Sloan. The man at the desk introduced himself last, and only because Julian was holding out a registration form. Corbin Shaw. I own the place." He looked at the form, then at Eden, then at the pink backpack under Julian's arm. "Kids' class already started. She's late." By 4 minutes. 4 minutes is late. Corbin took the form anyway. His eyes went down the page and stopped. Occupation. Mechanic. That's right. Huh. He set the pen down. "We get a lot of guys who work with their hands. They come in thinking they're tough because they can lift a transmission." He smiled without any part of his face agreeing to it. "Toughness is a skill, my man. It's not a job title." Julian signed both forms, Eden's and his own, and paid the first month in cash, $180, because he did not want a card statement with the school's name on it. Then he crouched down and helped his daughter get her hair out of her collar. 2.5 hours, he told her. "You do your class, then you sit right there and do your reading while I do mine. You don't leave that bench." "I know. Say it back to me." "I don't leave the bench." She rolled her eyes with her whole head, which was the closest she came to affection in public. The youth class went fine. Eden was stiff and serious and fell over sideways twice, and the second time she looked across the room to see if her father had seen, and he had. And he gave her nothing but a small nod. And she got up. At 6:25, the last of the children filed out to the parking lot with their parents, and by 1:30 the building held 4 adults, 1 child, and a bench. The 7 o'clock class was where it began in earnest. Julian lined up at the far end of the row where the white belts go. He was told to hold a stance, and he held it wrong. He was corrected, and he took the correction. When Gavin ran the group through falls, Julian landed flat and hard and let the air go out of him honestly, and Landon called out from the front of the room that they had a natural folks look at that form, and the room laughed again. He let them. That was the arrangement he had made with himself in the truck. Whatever came, he would take it. He would take it because the alternative was a lesson Eden did not need to learn about her father in a strip mall out past the highway. It was the backpack they kept coming back to. Corbin noticed it against the wall at the 20-minute mark and asked whether Julian needed his juice box before the next round. He asked later if the little bag had a change of clothes in it in case things got scary. Each time the 2 instructors laughed on cue, and the 4 other students laughed a half-second behind them. Quieter the way people laugh when they are grateful it is not them. Eden sat on the bench with her book open on her knees and did not turn a page for the last 40 minutes. At 8 o'clock, Julian bowed off the mat, collected his shoes, and walked over to her. "Ready?" She nodded and stood up fast. They were 9 steps from the door when Corbin called across the room. "Cross, hang on." The last 2 students were already outside headlights swinging across the papered windows and gone. Gavin was at the entrance, and he did not so much block it as arrive at it, and then the deadbolt turned over with a sound that filled the whole room. "We do something for new guys," Corbin said, walking out onto the mat in bare feet, unhurried. "Call it initiation. Everybody here's done it. Landon did it. Gavin did it. You want to train in this house, you get welcomed in." "We're leaving," Julian said. "My daughter has school in the morning. She can watch. Be good for her." Corbin tipped his head toward the bench. "Kid should know what her old man's made of." Gavin crossed to the wall, picked up the pink backpack by one strap, and turned it upside down over the mat. A pencil case, a folded worksheet, a hair tie, a granola bar, a plastic dinosaur with a chipped tail. They spread out across the vinyl and stopped. Eden made a small sound and started forward. Julian put his hand flat against her collarbone and moved her back toward the wall. "Pick it up," Julian said. Landon raised his phone. The screen lit his face from underneath, and beside the red dot, a small number climbed where the viewers were. "Say hi," Landon said. "We're live." "Turn that off. It's a private group." Landon grinned. "Just the boys." Julian turned his head to find Corbin, and Corbin was no longer in front of him. The arm came across his throat from behind, thick and practiced, and the second arm went up behind his head, and the pressure came on smooth and immediate. He heard Gavin whoop. He heard Landon narrating something for the camera. He heard underneath all of it his daughter's voice saying "Dad" once high and thin from the wall. There were 4 seconds before the light in the room would start to gray, and Julian spent 2 of them deciding. If he let it happen, they would put him down on the floor in front of his child, and then they would let him up, and then he would still have to walk her out through that locked door. If he did the other thing, she would see her father do it. He had promised himself she would never see. Then Corbin adjusted his grip and squeezed harder, and the room went soft at the edges, and the promise stopped being one of the choices. Julian dropped his chin. It was not a movement anyone in that room would have recognized as technique. He simply turned his head a 1/4 inch and got the shelf of his jaw inside the crook of Corbin's elbow, and the artery that had been closing stayed open, and the gray at the edges of the room went back where it came from. After that, it was arithmetic. He stepped back into Corbin instead of pulling away, which is the opposite of what a frightened man does, and the weight coming toward him took the bigger man's base out from under him. They went down together. Julian did not let it be a fall. He steered it, and when the mat came up, he was already on the outside of the arm, and the arm was already turned the wrong way against the joint. Corbin's grip broke. Corbin's breath came out of him in one sheet. Landon was still holding the phone up when he swung with his free hand. Julian caught the wrist, folded it toward the forearm, and walked him down to his knees, the way a man leads a dog off a couch. The phone hit the mat face up and kept recording the ceiling. Landon went flat and stayed flat cheek against vinyl, because the alternative was a hand that would not work right for a month. Gavin came last, and Gavin came the way heavy men come, low and fast and certain. Julian let him arrive. He turned off the line of the charge, hooked an arm under the far shoulder as it passed, and used every pound of the man's own momentum to put him down against the wall padding. Then he closed the position so completely that Gavin's shouting turned into nothing but breathing, and he held him there until the shouting stopped and let go. 52 seconds. Not one of them was bleeding. Not one of them had a broken bone. All three were on the floor, and none of them could get up. And the difference between those 2 facts was the only thing Julian had held on to the entire time. He knelt and picked up the pencil case, the worksheet, the hair tie, the granola bar. He found the plastic dinosaur under the edge of the mat and turned it over once in his fingers before he put it in the bag. He zipped the bag. He crossed the room, turned the deadbolt back, and held the door open. Eden came off the bench and did not take his hand. She walked out ahead of him into the parking lot and stood by the truck, with her arms straight down at her sides. They were 4 blocks toward home before she spoke. "You knew how to do that." "Yes." "For how long?" "Since before you were born." She looked out the window at the tire place and the shuttered carpet outlet going past. "You didn't hurt them?" "No." "Why not?" He held the wheel and thought about how to say it in a way that would still be true when she was 15, and remembering it. "Because the second I decide it's about hurting them, it stops being about getting you home." Eden was quiet for another block. Then she said in a much smaller voice, "They dumped out my bag." "I know. That was my dinosaur. I got him," Julian said. "He's in there. He's fine." She cried then, finally with her face turned toward the glass so he would not see, and Julian drove the rest of the way with his hand resting on the back of her seat, because reaching for her would have made it a bigger thing than she could carry. He did not sleep. Sometime after 2, he stood in the dark hallway with his hand on the closet door and did not open it. The video came out on Thursday. Landon had promised a private group, and it had been private for about a day, which is the natural lifespan of anything a man films to impress his friends. Someone in that group saved it, and then did what people always do with a recording that runs 11 minutes and 40 seconds. He cut it down to the part worth watching. He set the start point where the mechanic's hand closed on Corbin Shaw's sleeve, because the 4 minutes before that were 3 men standing around a gym talking, and nobody watches that. 2 minutes and 9 seconds went up on a public account that afternoon, and by Friday, the clip had a name. People were calling it the 52 seconds, and there were versions with slow-motion overlays and arrows arguing about whether it was jiu-jitsu or something older. Julian found out from Ray Halstead, who owned the shop and had never once in 6 years looked at his phone during business hours. "That's you," Ray said, holding the screen out over the fender. "Julian, those are black belts." "They're instructors," Julian said, and went back under the hood. By Saturday, there were 2 vans in the lot across the street, and a woman with a microphone came into the bay and asked brightly whether he had a comment about becoming the internet's favorite dad. Julian wiped his hands, said no thank you, and asked her to step back from the lift. After that came a morning show, a management company offering to represent him, a podcast host who only wanted 20 minutes. Julian answered none of it. On Sunday evening, a number he did not recognize called with a Virginia area code, and something in him knew what it was before he saw it. He let it go. It called again a few minutes later. The 3rd time he answered without speaking. "Cross." The voice on the other end had not changed in 6 years. That's a hell of a way to come back into the world. Julian stood in his kitchen with his daughter's homework spread out behind him on the table. "Sir, you've got about a week before somebody figures out what you did before you were a mechanic," Malcolm Raines said. "Let me get out in front of it. One statement. I'll put my name on it." "No." "Julian, she doesn't know," Julian said. "She's 9. She just found out her father knows how to put 3 grown men on a floor. That's already more than I wanted her to have. She's not learning the rest of it from a press release." There was a long breath on the other end, and then the sound of a man deciding not to argue with something he understood. "Whatever you think is coming, it's smaller than what's actually coming," Raines said. "You know where to find me." Julian deleted the number after he hung up. He was aware, even doing it, that he was not deleting it from himself. Corbin Shaw posted his own version on Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after Julian first walked into the building. He did not have to edit anything. The internet had already done it for him. He took the 2-minute clip that was circulating, put the school's logo in the corner, and wrote a caption underneath about a man who had come into a family school, been asked politely to leave after making a scene, and had responded by assaulting 3 certified instructors in front of children. The word children was doing an enormous amount of work. The youth class had ended at 6:25. Every child in the building that night had gone home except one, and she had been sitting 6 feet from the wall her own backpack had been emptied against. The 3 of them gave statements within a day of each other, and the statements agreed in the specific matching way that only rehearsed things do. Gavins mentioned a shoulder he could no longer raise above chest height, and a physician's note he said he would provide. Landon said he had feared for the safety of the young students, and that, in his opinion, the man was not a beginner and had lied on his intake form. Corbin's went furthest. A background check on Julian Cross returned almost nothing, and a man with no history is a man hiding one. By Wednesday, the 52 seconds had a second life, and this one was uglier than the first. The same clips that had celebrated him ran again with new captions, and the word hero got replaced by the word unhinged. A commentary channel made a 15-minute video explaining over freeze frames of Julian's face that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who does not react to insults because he is not calm. He is collecting. There was a comment under that video that got 19,000 likes. It said, "What kind of father brings a 9-year-old to watch that Julian read it, standing in the parking lot behind the shop?" And then he put the phone in his pocket and did not take it out again for the rest of the day. He could have ended it in 10 minutes. The full recording existed. Landon had filmed from the moment the door was bolted, and there were cameras in the corners of the academy too, which Julian had noticed the first night out of an old habit he had never managed to unlearn. But the footage was not the problem, and he knew it by Wednesday night. The moment he started fighting this in public, the fight would become about him. Reporters would go looking, and what they would find once they got past 6 years of oil changes was a 15-year hole where a man's life should be, and men do not get to keep holes like that private once the internet decides it wants inside. So he said nothing, and the story wrote itself without him. Ray Halstead called him into the office on a Friday morning and could not look at him while he did it. 2 customers pulled their cars off the lot yesterday, Ray said. "One of them's been coming here since my father ran it. And there were people out front again this morning, with signs, Julian, in front of a transmission shop." He turned a paperclip over on the desk. The insurance guy used the phrase foreseeable liability. "I don't know what that means, but I know what it costs." "How long?" "You're paid through the end of the month. After that..." Ray shrugged with his whole upper body, the way a man does when he is asking to be forgiven for something he has already decided. "Come back when this dies down. It'll die down." Julian carried his tools out to the truck himself, so nobody would have to watch him be walked out. On the second trip, he passed the milk crate by the compressor where Eden did her homework, and he picked it up and put that in the truck too. And that was the part that got him standing in the lot with a plastic crate in his hands at 10:40 in the morning on a workday. At school, it took less time than he expected because children are efficient. Trevor Ames, the same boy from the swing, the one whose grip had started all of this, apparently had a mother with a good phone and strong opinions. By the end of that week, Eden had been asked a dozen times whether her dad was the guy from the video, and whether he had gone to prison, and finally at a lunch table, whether he hit her too. She had said no. The girl who asked had said that's what you'd have to say, and Eden had eaten the rest of her lunch in the second-floor bathroom. She did not tell her father any of that. He learned it from the school counselor, Mrs. Alcott, who called on a Tuesday and chose her words with visible care. "We've received a number of calls from parents. Some are asking about supervision at pickup." Then quieter. "Mr. Cross, I've been at this school 9 years. I've never had a student handle something like this the way she is." That night, Eden did her homework at the kitchen table instead of at the shop, because there was no shop. And Julian made grilled cheese, and they both pretended that was a treat. Nathan Beale's mom said I could still come over. Eden reported cutting the sandwich into 2 triangles she did not eat. Then she called back and said, "Actually, this week's bad. That's 3 times now." She looked at her plate. "Are we going to be okay for money?" He had been ready for almost every question, except that one. "Yes," he said. "That's not a thing you carry. That's mine." The woman from the county came on a Thursday, and she was polite, and that was somehow worse. Her name was Denise Whitaker, and she had a state badge on a lanyard and a folder with Eden's name printed on the tab. She explained that a report had been made, that a report being made was not the same as a finding, and that she was required to open a file and look. She asked to see where Eden slept. She asked what was in the refrigerator. She asked Julian twice in slightly different words whether he had ever used physical force in the home, and both times he said no, and both times she wrote for longer than the word no required. Then she asked to speak with Eden alone, and Julian stood in the kitchen with his hands flat on the counter, listening to the low shape of his daughter's voice through a closed door, and not one word of what she was saying. When Denise Whitaker left, she said the file would stay open, pending review, and she said it kindly, and Julian closed the door and stood with his back against it. Camille Porter was a family attorney with an office above a bakery on 3rd, and she had come to him 2.5 years earlier with a fuel pump problem on a Volvo that 3 other shops had misdiagnosed. She took his call on the 2nd ring and told him to come in on Monday. She read for a long time before she spoke. "The criminal exposure is real, but it isn't what's going to hurt you," she said. 3 complainants, 1 clip, and a claimed shoulder injury. That's a case somebody has to actually prove, and I don't think they can. She turned the folder around. "This is what's going to hurt you." It was a copy of a filing. Julian read it twice. "Trevor Ames," he said. "His mother, technically, Marcy Ames." Camille tapped the page. "She's filed a formal request that the county review your custody of Eden. She cites the video, the Open Child Services file, and an unsafe home environment. She is also, and I want you to hear this, almost certainly not doing this on her own. A request like this from a parent with no relationship to your household is unusual, and the language in it is not hers." Julian set the paper down very carefully, because his hands wanted to do something else with it. "They can do that. Anyone can file anything. That's not the problem." Camille folded her hands. "The problem is that once Child Services has an open file and a custody review lands on top of it, the county has to build a complete picture of you. And right now, there is no picture. There's 6 years of oil changes and a wall behind it." She waited. "Julian, where were you before this town? That's not relevant." "It is the only thing that's relevant. You have a 15-year gap and a recording of you disabling 3 trained men in under a minute. Do you understand what a county attorney does with those 2 facts and nothing in between?" "I understand it fine." "Then give me something to put in between." He looked at the window at the shape of the bakery's sign in reverse on the glass. "No." Camille let out a breath. "Then I'll fight it with what I have, and I'll fight it well, and I want you to know it may not be enough." The thing that came closest to breaking him happened 4 days later in the parking lot of a grocery store on the north end of town. Julian was loading 2 bags into the truck bed with Eden standing by the passenger door when Corbin Shaw came across the lot in a black ridge jacket with the collar up. Gavin was with him holding a phone at waist height, angled up, already recording. "There he is," Corbin said, stopping about 6 feet away. "You look tired, my man. Not working." Julian put the second bag down and turned so that his body was between the 2 of them and the passenger door. "Walk away. It's a public parking lot." Corbin looked past him. "Hey, sweetheart, your dad tell you what he did to my shoulder?" Eden did not answer. Julian felt her move in behind his hip, and he felt the exact place in himself where a door was standing open, and he knew with the total clarity of a man who has done arithmetic like this before that he could put Corbin Shaw on the asphalt in under 2 seconds, and that Gavin would get most of it on video. That was what the camera was for. That was the entire reason they had crossed the lot. Julian did not move his feet. He did not raise his hands. He kept them loose and down and open where the phone could see them. And he said, "You're standing too close to my daughter." "Or what?" "There's no or what," Julian said. "I'm telling you where you're standing." Corbin waited longer than was comfortable for either of them. And then something went out of his face, the disappointment of a man who has set a trap on a very good spot and watched the animal simply not step into it. He laughed, said something about how it was nice to see the internet's toughest guy doing his shopping, and walked back toward his car, with Gavin trailing and the phone still up. Julian got Iden into the truck and shut the door and stood there for a moment with his hand on the roof. His hands were steady. They had been steady the whole time. That was not the part that frightened him. It was a Sunday night and rain had been coming down since the afternoon, and Eden was supposed to have been asleep for an hour when she came out into the hall in her socks. Julian was at the kitchen table with the county paperwork spread in front of him and the light over the stove on which was the only light he ever used after 10. "You're up." "I can't." She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed over the front of her pajamas. "That lady's coming back, isn't she? The one with the badge. Once more. Maybe twice." Nathan's mom told him Trevor's mom is trying to make me live somewhere else. Julian closed the folder. "Come here." She came as far as the other chair and put her hands on the back of it instead of sitting. "Dad." She was working very hard to keep her voice flat, and it was failing at the edges. "In the gym. That night. You did that because those men were hurting you and they wouldn't let us leave. Right?" "Right." "You did it so we could go home." "Yes." "So." Eden's chin went up, and it was her mother's chin, and it did not shake. "Are they going to take me away from you because you protected me?" Julian opened his mouth. Nothing came out of it. He had answers for almost everything she had ever asked him. He had an answer for why the sky went orange at the end of the day, and an answer for why her mother was not there, and an answer for what to do when a boy takes your wrist and will not give it back. He had spent 6 years building a life in which he would never be caught without an answer for this child. And he sat in his own kitchen and could not tell her no. Eden watched him not say it. She understood exactly what it meant because she was 9. And not stupid. And after a moment, she came around the chair and put her arms around his neck. And Julian held on to his daughter and looked over her shoulder at the hallway. He got her back into bed and stood in the doorway until her breathing changed. Then he went down the hall and opened the closet. The gray box was on the top shelf, behind a folded blanket exactly where it had been for 6 years, and it was heavier than he remembered the way things always are. He carried it to the kitchen table and set it under the stove light and worked the combination 4 numbers a date that meant nothing to anyone alive except him and possibly 2 other men. The lid came up. Discharge papers. A rank he had not said out loud in 6 years. Instructor qualifications for a curriculum that had a designation instead of a name. A photograph of a dozen men in front of a hangar, and he was the one on the left who was not smiling. A letter of commendation describing in the flat and bloodless grammar of the service an incident in which 140 detainees had been moved and secured over 9 hours with 0 injuries on either side. And underneath all of it, a second photograph, face down, that he did not turn over. He had put every one of these pages away on purpose, not because he was ashamed of them, but because a man cannot be 2 things at once in a small town. If he ever became the man in that hangar photograph again, Eden would grow up as that man's daughter, with people deciding what she was made of before she opened her mouth. He had chosen the oil stains. He had chosen the milk crate by the compressor. He had chosen every single day for 6 years to be nobody in particular, and the price of staying nobody in particular was now his daughter. He picked up his phone and searched a Virginia area code and found nothing because he had deleted it. So he called Camille Porter's office instead and left a message on a machine that would not be heard until morning. "It's Julian Cross," he said. "You asked me where I was before this town." He looked at the papers laid out under the light. "The answer is in a box on my kitchen table, and I'm bringing all of it to you. 15 years every page. Whatever they need, put it in the record." He hung up and sat there with his hands flat on the table. A man who had just agreed to lose the only thing he had ever managed to build for himself in order to keep the only thing that mattered. Camille Porter did 3 things that Monday morning. She subpoenaed the hard drive. Black Ridge Combat Academy had 4 cameras that recorded to a drive in the office, and Julian had told her exactly where it sat, and by Tuesday afternoon, a deputy walked out of that building with it in an evidence bag, while Corbin Shaw stood at his own front desk, trying to remember when he had last thought about them. She subpoenaed the phone. That one needed help, and the help came from a woman named Paula Reeser, who had worked the Black Ridge front desk in the fall, and quit in November, and who was still, because nobody had thought to remove her in the group chat. And she read 15 years of a man's service record at her kitchen table until 2 in the morning, then called a command in Virginia and asked for a name she had found on a commendation letter. The hearing was set 3 weeks out in a county building near the bakery, in a room with beige walls and no gallery. The matter before it was the child services file and the custody review that had landed on top of it. Corbin Shaw came in a suit. Landon Pierce and Gavin Sloan came in the same jackets they wore to teach, which Camille noted quietly to Julian as they sat down, because men who dress like their own advertisement have usually confused an audience with a proceeding. Julian wore a shirt with a collar. Eden was at school. That had been the one thing he insisted on. Marcy Ames spoke first, and she was earnest and genuinely frightened, and that made it worse because she believed every word she had been handed. Then the county attorney summarized the file. Then 2 minutes and 9 seconds of video played on a screen mounted high on the wall, and the room watched Julian Cross turn a man's arm the wrong way 4 times from 3 angles. When the lights came up, Camille asked for permission to present the recording in full. "That is the full recording," Corbin's attorney said. "That is 2 minutes and 9 seconds, Camille said. "I have 11 minutes and 40. The room watched it from the beginning. They watched the last 2 students leave and the headlights swing across the papered windows. They watched Gavin Sloan cross to the door and throw the deadbolt. They watched a man in a stained work shirt say something and take a step toward the exit and stop when Gavin moved into it. They watched Gavin pick up a pink backpack by one strap and turn it upside down. They watched a small girl start forward and a hand come across her collarbone and move her back to the wall where she stayed. They watched Landon Pierce raise his phone. They watched Corbin Shaw walk around behind a man who was standing still with his hands at his sides, put an arm across his throat and squeeze, and they watched the timestamp in the corner run 4 seconds 56 before anything at all happened in response. Nobody said a word. Marcy Ames put her hand over her mouth at the second 7. Then came the 52 seconds at normal speed from a ceiling camera without music. Seen that way, it did not look like violence. It looked like a man taking 3 sets of hands off himself one at a time and setting them down. Camille let it run to the end, through Julian kneeling to gather a pencil case, a hair tie, a plastic dinosaur, through him crossing the room to turn the deadbolt back, through the door opening and the girl walking out ahead of him. Then she turned the screen off and put a second folder on the table. The messages began 3 days before Julian ever set foot in the building, and they were not the messages of men defending a school. Corbin had written that the numbers were down, that Black Ridge needed a viral moment before the spring sponsorship renewal, and that what they needed was a nobody who would fold on camera. Landon asked which one. Corbin answered with a photograph of an intake form taken from behind the front desk, with the word mechanic visible in the occupation field. There was one from 10 minutes before 9 on the night itself, after everyone had gone home, and 3 men had picked themselves up off a mat. Whatever gets posted, it starts where he grabs me. Nobody watches the first 4 minutes. And there was a longer one 11 days later, in which Corbin pasted 4 paragraphs of text and told Landon to get it in front of the Ames woman, because a complaint from a parent lands differently than a complaint from us. Marcy Ames read those 4 paragraphs off the screen and recognized them as her own, filing word for word, and she did not stay in the room after that. Gavin Sloan's shoulder came apart next, and it took less time. The physician's note he had provided listed an examination date, a practice address, and a signature. The practice had confirmed in writing that no patient by that name had been seen on that date or any other. The imaging he submitted belonged to a different man entirely and had been pulled off a public medical education site, which Camille demonstrated by putting the 2 side by side identical down to the timestamp burned into the corner. Landon's sworn statement had said he feared for the safety of the young students in the building. The Academy's own sign-in log showed the youth class ending at 6:25 and the incident occurring at 4 minutes past 8. There had been exactly one child in the building, and the room had just watched what was done to her belongings. Then Camille turned to the thing that had actually cost Julian something. "Before we finish," she said, "the county has asked correctly who this man is. My client spent 6 years making sure nobody could answer that. He's answering it now." The service record went in whole 15 years, every page, including the parts Julian had never intended to say out loud, in a room with strangers in it. When the county attorney asked whether he understood that the file would become part of the public record, Julian said that he did. The last witness appeared by video link from an office with a flag behind him and nothing on the walls. Malcolm Raines identified himself, confirmed his command, and confirmed that Julian Cross had served 15 years, the final 6 as a senior instructor in non-lethal control, and restraint, a curriculum he explained whose entire measure of success is the number of people who walk away undamaged. The county attorney asked what that meant in practice. "It means the man you're looking at was trained for years to end situations without injuring anyone," Raines said. The standard he was held to was 0 harm on both sides, and he met it under conditions considerably worse than a strip mall. Camille asked for his assessment of the footage. "He gave up 4 seconds of consciousness to avoid using any of it," Raines said. "He had a joint at end range on the first man and stopped short. The second man's wrist was in a position where a 1/4 inch of pressure ends a career, and he held it there and did nothing with it. The third he pinned and released the moment the man stopped struggling. He looked into the camera. Every one of those 3 had a broken arm available to him. He declined all 3. That isn't luck, and it isn't mercy. It's a skill, and he used it on the worst night of his life in front of his kid." Julian sat with his hands flat on the table and did not look up from them. The county closed the child services file with no finding, and the custody review was dismissed the same week. The letter cited 2 things: the complete recording and a 15-year service history that the reviewing attorney described as answering in full every question the county had about the gap in Mr. Cross's background. Camille put the letter in front of him and tapped that sentence twice with one finger and said nothing else, because she did not have to. Denise Whitaker came to the apartment one more time with the same lanyard and a much thinner folder. She told Julian the file was closed, then set the folder down and said something that was not in any procedure she was required to follow. "For what it's worth," she said, "I sat with your daughter in that room for 19 minutes and she spent about 17 of them explaining to me why you weren't in trouble." The criminal complaint was withdrawn 9 days after the hearing, and the county attorney's office did not withdraw it quietly. The statement noted that the complainants had submitted a fraudulent medical document, sworn statements contradicted by their own business records, and a recording whose starting point had been chosen by the complainants themselves. Marcy Ames wrote Julian a letter that ran 2 pages and apologized 4 separate times. He read it once, put it in a drawer, and never brought it up to anyone, including Trevor, who ended up in Eden's science fair group the following spring, and was by all accounts careful with her. The 3 men did not fare as well. The state certification board suspended all 3 credentials and then revoked Corbin Shaw's, outright citing the fabricated medical documentation as an independent ground. 2 sponsors terminated their agreements within a week of the messages becoming public. The spring renewal Corbin had been so worried about had been worth a little under $40,000, which was in the end the price he had put on a man's life. Then the rest of it came up the way it always does once people stop being afraid. A former student came forward about a rank he had paid $900 for and never tested for. 2 others described initiations of their own from years earlier that had never been filmed, because in those years, nobody thought to film anything. Paula Reeser told a local reporter she had quit after being told to stop asking why certain injuries were not written in the log. Enrollment fell to nothing inside a month. Corbin Shaw stopped paying rent on the unit between the vacant carpet outlet and the tax office, and the landlord, who had by then read everything there was to read, made exactly one phone call. Camille handled the sale. The building came with a lease assumption, $12,000 of unpaid utilities, 4 cameras, and a mat that needed replacing. The purchase price for the business itself was $1. Julian paid it in cash out of his wallet at a folding table in an empty office, and Camille made him wait while she wrote out a receipt because she said he would want it later. Ray Halstead called the day the sale went through and offered him his job back. Julian turned it down, and Ray, who had spent 2 months feeling like a coward, said that was fair, and then asked whether he could send his nephew over when the place opened. The sign that went up over the door said Home Mat Academy in plain black letters on a white field with no photographs in the windows of men mid-throw. There were 3 rules on the wall inside printed large enough to read from the mat. Julian had written them on the back of a work order the week before the sale closed. Everyone leaves on their own feet. You are responsible for your partner. You never have to prove anything to anyone in this room. The doors were never locked while a class was running. There were no initiations. There was no filming without a signed release from every person in the frame, which was the only rule Julian ever enforced with anything close to sharpness. When new students asked where he had trained, and they always asked, he told them 15 years in the service, then told them where the water fountain was, and that was generally the end of it. He turned down every interview request for the rest of that year, and the year after that, the requests stopped coming, which was exactly what he had wanted from the beginning. Eden trained on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She was stiff and serious for about 4 months, and then something in her let go, and by the following winter, she was the one walking the newest kids through their falls, saying the same 4 things her father had said to her, in the same order. She turned 11 in the 2nd year of the school. On a Thursday that fall, a boy in the youth class shoved another boy over a spot in line, and Eden got there before any adult did, and she did not put hands on him. She stepped in between and said something short, and the boy went to the end of the line and stayed there. Julian watched from the office doorway with a clipboard he had stopped writing on. Later closing up, Eden asked him whether she had done it right. You did it right. I didn't do anything, though. You put yourself between a person and the thing that was going to happen to him, Julian said. That's the whole job. The rest is just what you do if it doesn't work. She thought about that while she pulled the mat sections back into line with her foot. Dad, that night at the other place, you could have really hurt them. Yes. Why didn't you? Julian shut off the second bank of lights, and the room went to that soft, half-dark Jim gets when everyone has gone home. Because you were sitting 6 feet away, he said, and I still had to drive you home after. The gray box lived in the office, now unlocked on a shelf above the desk. Most of what had been in it was public record. The one page that was not had come out of the box and into a frame. The week the school opened, a young woman on a hospital bed with a newborn against her collarbone and a man in uniform beside her out of focus because whoever took the picture had not been steady. Eden picked up her backpack, not the pink one anymore. That one lived on a shelf in her closet with a plastic dinosaur in the front pocket, and slung it over one shoulder and waited for her father by the door. The strongest thing a man ever does is not winning the fight. It is knowing exactly what he is capable of choosing less than that, and still getting the people he loves home safe.